In this video, we're going to be going over reports and dashboards inside of CRM in detail. So I'm going to walk you through the reports first, going through data structure, joining different modules, and then formatting the report. Then we're going to jump over into dashboards. I'll kind of go through some of the different chart types and options there, and then show you how to configure those. So before we jump in, I do want to ask, if you find this video useful, please be sure to like and subscribe down below. Leave us a comment if you've got any feedback, future video requests, and as always, just head right on over to zenatta.com and click on book a meeting if you'd like to chat about how we can help on your Zoho installation. So without any further ado, let's jump into CRM. So for the purpose of creating our report here today, I'm going to be looking at accounts, contacts, and deals. It kind of gives us a good way to look at various data relationships between modules as we're setting up that kind of initial selection on the report. So just as a quick reminder, essentially the way that the account, contact, and deal are going to work is our account is going to be kind of that top level of hierarchy, where within our account, we can have many different contacts and many different deals. When you're looking at one of these records and you're seeing these lists of related objects, what we want to think about is really that this account is the parent and the deals and contacts here are child records. Now, your data structure gets a little more complicated because if we were to click into a deal, we can see that, well, a deal actually is a child record of both an account and a contact. So an account is a parent of a contact, and a contact and account are a parent of a deal. So if we were to go ahead and open up our reports tab and create a new report, and we wanted to have this report contain data about accounts, contacts, and deals, how exactly would we do that? So let's go ahead and create a new report. We're going to choose our primary module, and there's a lot of different ways that you can think about structuring this. We could start from the perspective of a deal and kind of link up to a contact, up to an account, or we think about starting from an account and linking down into the multiple child records. Now, this is kind of the way that I would recommend doing this. I would start with the highest level of your hierarchy, so in our case being the account, and then add those additional modules as children to that. Really, the main reason is that we want to make sure that because we have this multiple layer hierarchy from a deal to a contact to an account, that we respect that order. We want to make sure that those contacts are going to be nicely organized on an account by account basis. So we'll start at the top. Now, this is the page where a lot of people get tripped up. So I'm going to go through this in detail, right? So right here, we're looking at an account, and then we've got this parent module and child module button. Now, what a parent module is if we had something that was above the account in the hierarchy and we want to include data from there. And so if we were to go and look at one of our accounts, and we'll bump this thing out of Canvas view here, what is the parent of a given account? Well, there's two different things it could be. It could either be a parent account, right, where we have a parent-child relationship, or it could actually be the user that owns that account, right? And so really all that we're talking about when we say a parent record of an account, that is just an account where we have a lookup from the account module to that parent record, right? So in our case, if we wanted to maybe pull some data about the created by user, the account owner, we could use this parent. In our case, just creating some reporting around accounts, contacts, and deals, we're not going to need to do that. Now, next, let's choose a child module. And we want to think about, which child module do we want to create, right? Do we want to start with contacts? Do we want to start with deals? Now, in my case, what I'm going to do here is start with contacts, because a contact is a child of an account, but it's also a parent of a deal, right? So I want to go in that most straight line hierarchy as I'm setting up this first page. And so here I'll say, hey, I want to include contacts for each of my accounts. When you create these child record relationships, it's going to ask you about this relationship type. There are two types. There's either inclusive or exclusive. Really, the only difference here is just some of the logic that's going to go in. So if I choose an inclusive relationship, what that's going to mean is that this report is going to include all accounts, whether or not they have a related contact. If I choose exclusive, then this is only going to show accounts that do have a contact linked up to them. In my case, I'm going to use an exclusive report here because I'm really looking to see essentially where are all my deals in pipeline, right? So I'm going to go ahead and use an exclusive link and show only accounts that have a contact. Lastly, I can go ahead and add a child record of those contacts. And so in this case, this is going to be the deal. Now, again, I'm looking at pipeline data, so I'm going to choose this as an exclusive relationship. Now, from there, we could go further, right? We could actually include data about calls related to that deal, emails related to that deal, tasks, meetings, whatever it may be. In our case, we're going to keep it simple with these 3 modules, but just know you can kind of extend these in a lot of different ways. Another example, maybe you have like certain vendors on your deals and you want to link it from there. Maybe you want to show deals by the campaign. You could add another parent record. But again, in our case, we're going to keep this kind of straight line hierarchy. Now we'll go to the next page. This is where we start making decisions about what type of data is going to be relevant for us inside of this report. So over on the left, we're going to be able to choose any of the columns that we care about. We can reorder those columns by dragging them in this list, right? So I'm moving account name up and down. If we want to add new columns, we can just click on this little pencil icon. And then within here, I can check a box to add any particular field that's going to be relevant for us. So in my case, like I'm looking at account number, I'm looking at account site, maybe even account type, and I'm like, let's just get rid of those, right? So I'll just uncheck those boxes and click done. And now I have a much cleaner looking report that I can use as my baseline. Now let's go ahead and add some new data. Inside of this record, maybe I want to add some additional data from our deals. So up at the top, I can choose the deals module and then take a look and see which data is going to be relevant for me. So maybe I want to have my deal stage. That's kind of always an important part. Maybe I want to include my amount. And then just for visibility, I'll drop in my closing date. So now I've added those columns. I can organize these however I'd like. First thing I'm going to do is actually bring this stage up to the first column. And you'll see why I will do that in just a moment. But this is really going to be how I might want to organize deals. Right? So for each of my stages, how many deals do I have? What accounts are they for? Who's that primary contact? I'm going to organize it based on stage. So I'm going to move that all the way to the left. Now we have a couple more options down here at the bottom. We have row groups, column groups, and aggregate columns. So let's take a look at what exactly each of those is going to do. Starting with row groups. This is going to be one of your primary ways that you're going to organize data inside of a CRM report. So let's say that I wanted to properly group up this data based on the deal stage, right? This is a perfect example of when I'm going to use a row group. So I can just select the stage option here. When I click done, what we'll see is that now it's essentially grouped up each of these particular values against the deals, right? So now I have this nicely sorted and grouped up list of all of my deals based on the appropriate stage that they're in. Let's say next, I want to look at a column grouping. So what a column grouping is going to do is essentially turn this into like a 2-axis pivot table. And so let's say I want to add a field here. I'm just going to grab account type. This is something I know I have some data in, where I might want to say, hey, for each of my different types of accounts, how many deals do I have in each stage? And so this report is going to look really different once I save this option. I'll take you through exactly what I mean. So I'm going to click done. And now what we'll see is all that data, all those specific columns that are up here, those are all gone now. The minute that you've added a row and a column group, you've really created a aggregating report, right? Because there would be no way for me to organize data by stage and by account type while also showing all of those various columns. The only way I could do that is maybe by adding multiple row groups. So I'm going to do that now just so you can see what I mean. So if I have a row and a column, right, I'm going to be getting essentially a count of each of these deals per account type that are in each stage. Now, if I were to move that account type over to be a row grouping instead, now you'll see I have this second order of organization within each of my deal stages. So like value proposition has 4 deals. 1 is a customer, 1's a distributor, and 2 are unknown. They don't have an account type associated. Now, again, I'm really just looking at stages here, so I'm going to focus on just that one row grouping for moving forward. Now, lastly, the aggregate columns. So aggregate columns are really useful, right? We're looking at this report and we say, hey, I've got 2 deals in qualification. I've got 4 deals in value proposition. What is the total dollar amount that I have in a particular stage, right? So the minute that you start to think about a sum, an average, right, anything where we're rolling up data, all of those are going to be our aggregate columns. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually have to search through a list of the operators. So sum, minimum, average, that would be like our operator. A big one's count as well as any of our numerical columns. So inside of my deal, that main column is the amount. So I'm going to search for amount. That's going to filter me down to see the average, sum, minimum, and maximum. In my case, I want to have that sum. So I'll go ahead and click on that. And once I click done, it's now added this really nice column for me that's going to organize each or sum up each of my amounts within each of my row groupings, which again, in my case, is the stage. Really useful here to be able to create essentially like a quick pivot table, right? That's going to update immediately from CRM data that you'll be able to use on an ongoing basis. Now, last thing that we haven't touched on here is the ability to filter inside of these reports. So when we're applying a filter, really what we're able to do is 2 different types. So we have our quick view filter. Quick view filters are essentially things that we can add to enable people to sort on the fly as you're like looking at a particular deal. So maybe I'm going to add like stage is, and I'll show you how to use that in a moment. But then let's say I want to add a more advanced filter. This is kind of like the back-end filter that's going to apply all the time. And so in my case, I might want to say, hey, stage is not closed lost, right? Like these just might not be relevant. Realistically, I'm going to leave closed won. A lot of the times you're going to remove that as well from a report like this, where you're really looking at things that are in pipeline. But in my case, I'm going to leave that for now just so we can make some reports out of this in the future. So let's add our options up here at the top, and then I'll click save. So now we'll notice is that that closed lost column has gone away, and I have all of my deal stages included. So now let's go ahead and save this. We're going to give it a name. We'll call this accounts with pipeline deals, and we'll save it to a folder. Now, again, there's a ton of different folders inside of the reports module. I'm going to save this to deals because that's like the primary thing that I'm looking at, right? Obviously, this report does contain data about accounts and contacts, but that's kind of secondary to the main thing that I'm looking at. So now I've created my report. Up here at the top, like I mentioned, we can come in and actually use that little quick filter to remove or add different stages. So maybe while I'm looking at this, I want to remove closed won. I can just remove that from my list and click apply. Now we've gotten rid of that. And then if I wanted to add it back, I can just use that here from directly inside of my quick filter list. These are really nice. They actually used to not have quick filters. Everything had to be done with those back-end filters. So if you're not using any of these in your reports right now, do consider it because it allows you to create one report that the user can kind of determine how they want to use it and kind of work with it from there. So I'm going to go ahead and just hide those for now. Now, the last thing that we can do with a report before we jump over into our dashboard configuration is actually create some charts and visualizations that are going to show up right here on the report. Now, I don't always recommend using these. You don't need to in all cases. A report like this, though, that's going to be one of those like really important banner reports that we're going to look at all the time, it can be nice to create an easily viewable chart. So let's do that now. We're going to create a chart. Now, for each of these, we're going to need to make some determinations. So our measure or our y-axis is something that we're going to have to decide. Do we want to look at like a count of deals within a grouping? Or do we want to look at a sum of the amount? In my case, I'm going to use sum of the amount. Then we can determine what grouping we should use. What you'll notice is this only is allowing me to use stage. The reason is that the stage is the thing that's been assigned as the row grouping, right? So I'm able to use that row grouping that I determined inside of my reports really easily. Down below, we can determine what our grouping should be. If we want to have a benchmark, like how much we want to have in each of these categories, we can add that here as well. And then over on the right, I can determine what type of chart I want this to be from a visualization perspective. So do I want to look at columns? Do I want to look at a bar? Do I want to see funnels? In my case, I think about this as kind of a funnel chart. So I'm going to use that for our reporting. And so now that I've clicked save, what we can see is that just like that, it's now created a funnel visualization for me where I can see at a snapshot in time how many dollars I have sitting in each of my stages inside of CRM. So again, just kind of a quick and easy little way to create a funnel based on your reporting configuration. I do want to highlight before we jump into analytics and dashboards that the CRM is going to come out of the box with quite a lot of pre-built reports, right? So if we go kind of category by category, you can see all of these different options. I will say a lot of the times you're going to end up wanting to create your own, but I want to also kind of mention you can come in and work off of one of these ones that they already have, right? So they have this open deals report. This has some pre-baked filters. It has some of those fields that are already added. And so I could just come into here, add stage to this report, and then other than the contact name, we've just done the same thing that we already just did, right? Like we're on that same track without having to start from scratch. So I do recommend kind of going through those different report folders and just seeing what's in there before you go and create stuff from scratch, because there may be something that's already really useful and ready to go that's just sitting inside of one of these folders. With that, let's jump over to the analytics section and take a look over here. Within our dashboards, we've got a couple different things that we'll need to do. So up here in the top left is where we'll create a dashboard. This is basically a place that's going to host different components. So in my case, I'm going to call this my example dashboard. When you create one of these, you'll need to determine the sharing settings up here on the top middle. And so I can say, hey, this should be for me, this should be for everyone, or this should be for some subset of roles and groups. In my case, this is just my demo account. I'll keep it as only me. Doesn't really matter in my case. Now, over here on the left are all of the different types of charts that you can add, or types of components. I'm going to go ahead and just add one. We're going to create one out of the gate because we have to in order to save the dashboard. But from there, we'll move on into going through some of those different options and charts that we can use for visualizing data. Now, when I add a chart, what you'll notice is that we've got two options. I can either create this chart immediately, just kind of like by choosing all my different parameters, or we can create one from a report. So I'm going to start by creating one from a report, and then we'll show an example of the quick chart. So creating from our report, what you'll see is that this is really similar to creating that pipeline view that I showed you on that report page, where we're going to be able to essentially pull based on the fields and the groupings that I've created inside of that report view. So maybe we'll want to call this pipeline, or maybe, amounts by pipeline stage. And here I'll be able to do those same types of options, like choose, I want sum of amounts, I want it grouped up by stage, I want a certain benchmark on here. And then last but not least, of course, I can choose what type of visualization I would like to use for this particular set of data. So again, I'm going to use my funnel here just because that's like the right one for this type of report, but this would kind of just be up to you to determine what's going to make the most sense in your particular use case. So now let's click save. We've now created that dashboard. And what is that going to look like when we come back to edit it later? Okay, so now inside of my analytics tab, I've got my example dashboard. Let's do a little bit more work on this. So up in the top right, we have that add component. Within here, we've got a ton of different components to use. I'm going to quickly go through each and every one of these for you. So one, we've got our charts. These are kind of like your standard visualizations, right? So some type of bar chart, some type of line chart, maybe a table, right? And we're able to essentially just quickly and easily create an X and a Y axis and then visualize the data along those axes. We also have KPIs. These are going to be like simple and quick visualizations. So like leads created this month, deals closed month to date, right? Like those big banner numbers that you want to have on people's radars. Next will be things like comparators. So a comparator is going to get used if you want to generally compare within maybe industries or employee versus employee, where you're going to be tracking some set of data, like in this case, leads created, but you want to slice it along a categorizer and compare them against each other. So in this case, it basically is like, hey, how are all of our sales reps doing against each other's performance numbers? And so a comparator can be a great option for that. Anomaly detectors are a little bit interesting. These could be a video of their own. Essentially, what an anomaly detector is going to look for is certain trends against a current change. So I could have an anomaly detector that's looking at maybe count of leads created within a certain time period. And let's say we'll look at like, hey, monthly leads created. We're going to look at this on a weekly basis. And then I want to see, are we doing something different, right? So these are a bit of a high-level report that are going to give you an idea of, hey, we're normally doing X. We're now doing X times 1.1. It'll notify you like, hey, good month. We have more leads than normal. Target meters are really useful. These are essentially a way to primarily look at a sum against a target grouping. So here, a big use case for these is like the quota and kind of deliverables, KPIs, things that people need to see on a day-to-day basis. We're able to come in here and configure those based on our needs. Next are going to be funnels. Now, you might be thinking, hey, you just created a funnel. What's the deal with that? These funnels work a little differently. We actually just made a video last week on how to do these funnel charts in detail, so I'm not going to go too far down the rabbit hole. But essentially, the really cool thing about the funnel charts is that they can pull data from more than one module. So when you're looking at like your lead to deal flow, you can't just look at deals and you can't just look at leads, right? You actually need to see like leads created, leads converted, deals that hit a certain stage, and then deals that move into closed won. So again, we have a video that came out last week that goes through these in detail. I highly recommend taking a look at that because they are a little bit tricky to set up. Cohort analysis is essentially looking at particular groupings or counts within a grouping. So here what we're saying is, hey, for each of these given creation periods, how many records were created and what was their duration, right? So we're looking at like the movement through a funnel potentially, the movement to a certain stage, and then we're going to slice those based on some time periods. Quadrants are an interesting one. This is where you have lots of different axes that you want to report on. So in my case here, like if we look at this example down below, the y-axis is our sum, the x-axis is our record count, and then we're making like the size of these based on those records. So you're kind of placing people into different groupings and quadrants. These can be pretty useful for like analyzing your clients and seeing if you can look and identify lookalikes. Like these two clients actually work kind of similarly based on the way that they're purchasing and using our product. Zones are going to be pretty similar, except you're looking more at like there is a correct place to be, right? So like maybe in this top right is like where we want people to be. They have a lot of deals and those deals are high value, right? So like it gives you more of a visual key into the performance where like a quadrant doesn't have as much of an opinion as a zone does, right? I know that's a weird way of saying that, but this just is not giving me an indicator of who's best on this list. Whereas that zone is saying, hey, there is a correct place to be. It's up in the top right. Last one, and these are pretty new, is looking at your stages. So what this is doing, these are primarily for like your deals. It's looking at for a given stage, how many of them from qualification, let's say, move to needs analysis. So you're getting like essentially a conversion rate on a stage by stage basis. Very useful for looking at your funnel and pipeline analytics. Now that we've gone through and looked at each of these at a high level, let's go ahead and create one, this time using our quick create so I can show you how these work. Now, when you go component to component and you're looking at those different types, you will see different fields on this page just based on the different types of axes that are going to be relevant. I'm going to make one here that's leads created by day by source because I want to show you something kind of interesting. So let's look at our leads. Let's determine if we need any related modules. In this case, we don't, but we could have a report that looks at leads and tasks. Let's determine what we want to sum up or count. So in my case, I do want to do a count of leads created. Now we're going to determine what our grouping is going to be. And now groupings in this case get really interesting. You know, actually, let's do this by month just so we have a better group option. So now we'll go ahead and we'll do our created time for our date by month, right? So as you're looking at these, you're going to have tons of different dates that you can choose to use. And then within those different groupings of those dates, like by week, by month, by year. But in my case, I also said by source. So we're going to actually add a secondary grouping. In this case, it's not going to be by date. Instead, it's going to be by one of our dimensions. And in our case, it will be based on that lead source. And what you'll see right away is that now some of our options up here are different. Like I can't really do a pie chart with 2 grouping parameters. Like how would that look, right? I can't really do a funnel with 2 grouping parameters. But if I look at like my column chart, this is now different, right? We're looking at a stacked bar because it's going to have one of them on the Y or the X axis, and the other one is going to color code the Y axis. So let's go ahead and add this and just take a look at what it looks like. So in my case, looks like all of my leads were created within August 2020. That's like when I spun up this demo account. I'm going to go ahead and just clone a bunch of leads so you can kind of see what this will look like with more data over time. Okay, so now I've gone ahead and just created a couple leads so you can see the multiple bars here. What you will notice is that for these reports, if there's not data within a given period, so in my case, like the given month, it will not show that month on here. But what it's doing is essentially giving me the total count of leads created in August, which is 8. But then it's also going to color code those based on the source value that I assigned, right? So I can see I had 2 from advertisement, 1 from cold calling, et cetera, et cetera. And so within this type of report, I really love stacked bars because they give me an idea of the overall trend, like on an aggregate basis of all leads, as well as kind of a sliced in version to take a look at the specific types or sources of leads that make up that overall trend line. So with that, I think that's going to cover it here for today. A couple just closing thoughts for you. I do really like the approach of looking at this one on the left where I've created a report to establish some of those groupings and parameters, and then I've used that report to create a dashboard view. Main reason is you might look at this and want to drill down, and then you can just click right through to that report itself to see that data in more detail. So I do kind of like that ability to drill down a bit more. But there are those cases where for something quick, like a KPI, maybe a comparator, you're just going to add it right in here, right? Make life a little bit easier, not need to go through the process of creating that report. From here, of course, these dashboard elements can be used on your home pages so that your team can easily see how they're trending against targets and expectations. With that, I think we're ready to wrap up here for today. I do want to make a special request on this video. Let me know if there are any other components on here that you guys are kind of stuck on or confused about, and I can make some additional video content around those. Just leave that down in the comments section below that like button. While you're down there, be sure to like and subscribe, as that really does help us out. Make sure that we know that we're making content that you guys are finding useful. And with that, we'll wrap up here for today. So thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.